Report on the rise of mass shootings. You can find the reporting on motherjones.com. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Thank you, Greta. Glad to be with you.
The House is now in for their legislative session. Live coverage here on C-SPAN.
Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., December 11th, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable John J. Duncan, Jr. to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3rd, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Coble, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the 13th of June of this year, I introduced a bill, H.R. 2357, to provide that members must complete 12 years of credible service to become vested into the retirement system. Now, I'm not professed to be no expert on pensions, Mr. Speaker, but 5 years appears to be very generous. So in my bill, I have extended that from the 5-year time frame to 12 years. Taxpayers subsidize this plan, and I believe by increasing the minimum time frame, I think it would obviously result in considerable savings. I have conducted no survey to support that, but common sense tells me that. In fact, this is a common sense proposal. For example, Mr. Speaker, a member of Congress now must complete only 5 years of credible service to become vested. Now, I know of no plan other than this one that would vest at 5 years. Such a member would be required, if my bill is enacted, to complete at least 12 years service prior to becoming vested. Now, I figured by now I would have had 4 or 5, strike that, I figured by after 4 or 5 weeks I would have attracted at least 20 to 25 co-sponsors. Today I have no co-sponsors. So to walk you through how it would work if my plan is adopted, a member of the Congress must complete not 5 years but 12 years service. And that can be done through 6 2-year House terms or two 6-year Senate terms, or a combination thereof. It's a common sense proposal. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, I will anxiously await the knock on the door for co-sponsors willing to sign up. The welcome mat is out, and it's a good proposal, and I thank the Speaker and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the rush to wrap up and go home, there's too much unfinished business, including leaving 2.15 million long-term unemployed in a lurch. But one item should not be on the agenda, an attempt to undermine the diplomatic breakthrough with Iran, the most encouraging development with that country in 34 years. We would give the hardliners in Iran, who really hate the preliminary agreement, an excuse to walk away. It would be a continuation of 60 years of mismanagement by the United States with our relationship with that proud nation with deep ties to America. The worst thing we did was team with the British to overthrow their democratically elected government in 1953 and replace Mossadegh with the Shah, who for 25 years was a repressive dictator. Few remember, if they ever knew, that the Iranians helped stabilize Afghanistan after we drove the Taliban from power. They don't know that the people in Tehran had candlelight vigils in sympathy to the United States after 9/11, where some of the supposed allies of the United States, they were jubilant in the streets. And for that, they were rewarded with the label of being part of the axis of evil. We must make diplomacy the key. We're not going to be able to bomb away the knowledge of how to develop nuclear weapons. Experts I've talked to say they could have made a nuclear bomb years ago if they had really been bent on that creation. Torpedoing the agreement will be counterproductive. It risks collapse of sanctions which depend on the Chinese, the Indians, and the Japanese not buying Iranian oil. If we appear unreasonable, we lose international support and we can lose ground. It would undercut President Hassan Rouhani, elected by the Iranians who want change and a more moderate approach to the world. Iranians, people who've been there testify, actually like Americans. They don't much like their repressive government. But that support can help reach more than just a nuclear deal. Iran is key to solving the nightmare that is Syria, prying them back from supporting the insurgents and support for a long-term solution. Iran is key to holding Iraq together and not having it spin off into civil war, and to defeat or at least contain the Taliban resurgence in Afghanistan. A recent poll showed 57% of the American public supports the agreement, and when they are given greater detail about what it entails, that support increases to 63%. Don't undercut the best chance to reorder the Middle East in a third of a century. I think we ought to give diplomacy a chance to succeed for a change.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, a great tragedy is now unfolding across America as we prepare for the new year. Millions of Americans are losing their health plans. Millions more are facing staggering price increases. Millions more are having their hours cut back at work or seeing their salaries pared back because of Obamacare. And sadly, this is just the beginning. In coming days, millions of employer-provided plans face cancellation, multiplying this disaster many-fold. The administration recently held a contest for videos to promote Obamacare. Its grand prize winner featured this message: "Don't worry about the price tag." Don't worry about the price tag? Isn't that helpful and compassionate advice to the millions of Americans who are struggling through the 5th year of Obamonomics and who are now also facing the reality of seeing their premiums doubling or tripling? Just don't worry about the price tag, skip the house payment, and cough up the extra cash. That's the best that this administration can offer. Many millions of Americans who had health coverage on New Year's Eve will not have it on New Year's Day because of Obamacare. And what awaits those who actually can sign up? Well, according to the government's own numbers, about 2/3 of exchange applicants have been forced into Medicaid. That includes many on limited incomes who've maintained bare-bones policies because they're desperately trying to stay out of Medicaid. Some have found that merely by looking at prices, they've ended up trapped in this dreaded welfare program. A major study documents that Medicaid patients have worse health outcomes than those without any insurance. And if you doubt that, just see how long it'll take you to see a Medicaid doctor, if you can find one, for a bad cold. If you're a part of the 1 in 3 exchange visitors who escaped this fate, the next problem will be to find a doctor, any doctor. The president of the California Medical Association reports that 70% of California doctors will not accept Obamacare patients. That means the remaining 30% will be overwhelmed, resulting in life-threatening waiting lines. As patients desperately seek doctors in emergency rooms, actual emergencies will go waiting. Top-flight specialized doctors and facilities would become completely inaccessible as they opt out of the system. Those patients who actually can get an appointment may then discover that there's no record of their policy because the government hasn't been able to connect patients with their new insurers. Patients will next face the cold reality of sky-high deductibles and co-payments that many will be unable to pay. Many hospitals that serve large populations of the poor can only do so because of supplemental payments, but Obamacare is phasing those out. Some may be forced to close their doors. Those Obamacare patients fortunate enough to stay well in this brave new world can expect a highly elevated risk of identity theft in what the founder of McAfee security software calls a hacker's dream. And there's no need to wait for hackers. In some cases, the government has already accidentally released patients' private financial and medical information. Now, since so many people, particularly the young, are choosing not to pay inflated prices to subsidize others, we can expect another major round of rate increases next fall on those remaining in the system in order to make up the shortfalls. That is what the new year will bring to our country. Now, many of us in the House warned of this coming train wreck, and we tried at least to delay it. For this, we were called arsonists, terrorists, jihadists, and demagogues. But now those warnings have proven chillingly and entirely accurate. This program has devastated the lives of millions of Americans. This damage now cannot be undone by delaying it or tinkering with it. It must be repealed and replaced with the patient-centered plan proposed by House Republicans, a plan guided by individual freedom of choice and open competition. This will only happen if there's a massive change of heart by the congressional Democrats who imposed this nightmare on our country. Now is the time for all Americans whose lives have been upended by their folly to share their stories with their representatives and to pray that they actually can touch some hearts and change some minds during this holiday season. Otherwise, I'm afraid that New Year's Day will be nothing to celebrate. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, when it was first opened in the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, the Guantanamo Bay prison may have seemed a reasonable stopgap measure as a shocked nation marshaled its resources and figured out how to dispose of detainees taken in Afghanistan and elsewhere. But even in those early days, the problems we were creating with Guantanamo's patchwork of military rules and commissions were readily apparent. Since 2002, I've introduced numerous bills and amendments to try to bring Guantanamo into conformity with American and international law and to stop it from becoming a jihadi recruiting tool. But reform of this prison system has been elusive, and progress towards bringing detainees to justice almost non-existent, as U.S. courts have taken strong issue with its improvised legal process. In one of his first acts as President Barack Obama ordered the closing of Guantanamo, but the Congress almost immediately stepped in and erected a series of statutory barriers that have prevented the transfer of detainees to the United States and made transfer to third countries extremely difficult. Today, there's a renewed push by the administration to shutter Guantanamo for good. Doing so will not be easy, but the cost of keeping the prison open to our values, to our pocketbook, to our reputation, and to our security have become too great to bear. There are now 164 detainees at Guantanamo, 84 of whom have been cleared for transfer to their home country or another country willing to accept them. These detainees should be processed and transferred as soon as security considerations will allow. This would leave 80 remaining detainees who are roughly split into two groups. The first group, which includes Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and other key 9/11 plotters, consists of detainees slated for trial under the military commissions that were established by the Bush administration. These proceedings have been mired in pretrial wrangling, and the longer they drag on, the less legitimate the overall system appears. Meanwhile, our civilian judicial system, which many congressional critics have derided as not up to the task of handling terrorism cases, has disposed of a long line of defendants, from Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, to Omar Farouk Abdul Muttallah, the underwear bomber, and Fazil Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, all successfully prosecuted in America's civilian courts, and none will ever be released again. By lifting its restriction on transferring these detainees to the United States for trial, Congress could give the administration the flexibility to transfer many of those now in military commission system to Article III courts for prosecution. These civilian courts can be more expeditious, more effective, and in the eyes of the world, more just than military tribunals. The remaining detainees, some 46 men, will be the most difficult cases. These are detainees considered too dangerous to release or transfer, but who cannot be prosecuted. For some, evidence cannot be presented without revealing critical sources of intelligence and methods. Others were tortured or evidence against them was collected through torture or some other unlawful means. For still others, the evidence of past acts and future dangerousness, while not sufficient to prosecute, argues compellingly against any release or transfer. The administration announced over the summer that it would begin a review of these cases, and as a result, others may be cleared for transfer or prosecution. But it is likely that many, if not most, of the detainees in this final category will remain in American custody. But where? Even if we ultimately decide to maintain these detainees in custody, that does not justify continued operation of Guantanamo Bay. Instead, they should be transferred to military or civilian confinement in the United States, an option currently blocked by Congress. Every day that it remains open, Guantanamo Bay damages the United States. Because there are other, better options for prosecution and detention of these inmates, we are not safer for Guantanamo's existence. In fact, it makes us more vulnerable by drawing new generations to the jihad. The Congress, the administration, and the military can work together to find a solution that protects our people, even as we maintain our principles and devotion to the rule of law. The President has indicated that he would like to work with Congress to end the Guantanamo era. We should take him up on that important challenge. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Food Network recently broadcast an episode of their hit reality-based cooking television series, Chopped. Aspiring teen chefs highlighted their culinary skills and competed for a scholarship that would be put towards a leading culinary school. Competition aside, these young chefs are ambassadors of career and technical education programs. They amazed professional judges and made the viewing public second-guess Mom's Cooking. As co-chair of the Bipartisan Career and Technical Education Caucus, which I'm proud to lead with my good friend, Congressman Jim Langevin from Rhode Island, I congratulate the Food Network and CHOP for promoting these young culinary professionals. Mr. Speaker, inspiration is like lightning. It doesn't strike in the same place twice. With 2014 quickly approaching, we should do everything in our power in order to support the culinary arts and the entire range of other career and technical education programs in fields that offer aspiring young minds and transitioning adults a gateway to success in a rapidly evolving and dynamic job market. The future of America deserves as much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for 5 minutes.
I rise to recognize Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory for its outstanding scientific work and the dedicated scientists who played a role in the effort that was recently awarded the 2013 Nobel Peace Prize. Yesterday in Oslo, Norway, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, also known as OPCW, received the 2013 Nobel Peace Prize for its work in enforcing the global ban on chemical weapons. The OPCW received this prestigious award in part because of the contributions from over 21 scientific laboratories around the world. And that work in different capacities led to identify and destroy chemical weapons across the world. One of these laboratories is from the 15th Congressional District, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Over the past 13 years, Lawrence Livermore Forensic Science Center has worked closely with the OPCW to analyze samples and test for the possible presence of chemical weapons. The OPCW and Lawrence Livermore Laboratory were recognized specifically for actions that OPCW have recently taken in Syria to identify, destroy, and dismantle the Assad regime's chemical weapons that they most recently used back in August on their own people. I have been a sharp critic of proposed military action in Syria. I believed all along that there was a third way, that it was not a false choice between isolationism, not doing anything, and taking military action in Syria. And the actions of OPCW and the United Nations have shown, and working in collaboration with the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, that diplomacy can work. We can go into Syria. We can identify these dangerous chemical weapons. We can dismantle them and make sure that a ruthless dictator never again can use them on his own people. Together, the work of OPCW and Lawrence Livermore Laboratory has created a safer world, but they recognize that their work will not be complete until the world is free of chemical weapons. I have been a tireless advocate for funding of both Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and the other laboratory that's in my district, Sandia National Laboratory. The work that is being done right now with OPCW shows that the work being done at our national laboratories has value and that we cannot continue to chip away at federal funding for our national laboratories. Congratulations again to OPCW for receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, and I'm very proud of the workers, the scientific community, the engineers at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory for your critical work in support of OPCW and their efforts. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Reed, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to highlight a framework I have designed which will begin to address the challenging fiscal issues we face as a nation. This proposal is to deal with the impending debt ceiling crisis that will be coming upon us in February or shortly thereafter. I am pleased to hear recent news today of a budget agreement dealing with a potential government shutdown resolution that avoids that government by crisis. But we have the debt ceiling issue right behind. And what I have put forth, Mr. Speaker, is an honest, sincere proposal consisting of 3 steps to reduce our spending on the federal level, address our nation's broken tax code, and ensure the solvency of Social Security and Medicare. Mr. Speaker, I outlined the proposal in a letter sent to the President on November 15th of this year. And that letter reads, Mr. President, it is time. As I have expressed before in writing to you and members of your administration, I am very interested in working with you in a bipartisan manner to implement long-term solutions to Americans' debt problem. Our impending debt crisis and threats to the solvency of Social Security and Medicare must be solved now before they reach catastrophic levels. I urge you to work with Congress to achieve a long-term solution. As such, I would like to take you up on your public offer to discuss ideas and implement solutions that will no longer force us to govern through crisis, cliffs, or shutdown deadlines. On October 16, 2013, you stated this quote, I am eager to work with anybody, Democrat or Republican, House or Senate members, on any idea that will grow our economy, create new jobs, strengthen the middle class, and get our fiscal house in order for the long term. To that end, I submit the following honest proposal, which I truly believe will take a small but significant step towards governing in a more responsible manner. Also, I hope it might change the culture of Washington, D.C., to an environment where good policy triumphs over politics. As you can see, the honest proposal is summarized in a multi-step vision and plan as follows. Step 1. We will raise the February 7, 2014 debt ceiling limit in an amount equal to the total CBO score of spending reductions, reforms, and removal of waste, fraud, and abuse within government operations that have already been identified and generally supported on a bipartisan basis. I submit a list of $573 billion of such government reforms and spending reductions so identified in such a bipartisan manner. Upon completion of Step 1, we will then move to Step 2. And in Step 2, what we would propose is that votes in the House and the Senate on their respective visions for comprehensive tax reform and also for reform of our entitlement programs to ensure their solvency for another generation would occur. If those votes occur in the House and Senate, there would be an automatic relief of the debt ceiling cap for an additional year. And then we would move to step 3, Mr. President. And step 3 would essentially say that if in the House or the Senate we enact either one of those long-term solutions to our tax code or to our entitlement crisis with our Social Security and Medicare insolvency coming down on us, we would immediately, in step 3, relieve the debt ceiling for an additional 2-year period of time. This would mean, Mr. President, the debt ceiling restraint would no longer impact your administration, as it would be automatically extended beyond the end of your administration's term. I kindly request you review this proposal, then meet to discuss how it can be improved and implemented. To me, this is an honest proposal which will put Americans first and begin to address the pressing issues of our day. We have a major debt issue that cannot wait any longer. Our arcane tax code stifles economic growth, and the fiscal health of Social Security and Medicare is worsening beyond control. If we solve these two challenges, we will place our children and grandchildren and our nation's finances in a far better position than where they are now projected to be. To me, this adheres to a fundamental rule that we must pass America on to our next generation in a better condition than which we found her. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and working with you to prevent the dire consequences of failing to address these challenges. Mr. Speaker, I have yet to receive a response from the President, not even a courtesy response, so I know that it was received and not lost in the mail between my office in the Longworth building to the White House less than 2 miles away. So I take to the floor today of the House to have my proposal officially recorded and to lay out this framework to get our nation on a path of fiscal sustainability, to get our Americans, fellow citizens, back to work by fixing our tax code and solving the entitlement crisis that is impending upon us. And with that, I ask us to join in this proposal and ask the President to join me in a bipartisan manner to address these concerns. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair and not to a perceived viewing audience. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, on Friday, the Republican leadership has decided that we will adjourn for the holidays, notwithstanding the fact that we haven't done immigration reform, we haven't passed the jobs bill, we haven't extended unemployment insurance. They've all decided it's time to go home and enjoy the holidays. So on Friday, we will all leave and go back to our districts. And the one thing that we will all have in common, Democrats and Republicans, is we'll go back and we will enjoy the holidays and we will partake in many celebrations. And the one thing that we will not have to worry about is whether or not we'll have enough to eat. Our concern, quite frankly, will be overeating. But the fact is, for millions of our fellow citizens, close to 50 million Americans, they will have to worry about whether they will have enough to eat for them and their families. 50 million people in this country, the richest country in the history of the world, are hungry. 17 million are kids. All kinds of people fall in that category. Sadly, close to 1 million of our veterans rely on food assistance programs because they don't have enough to eat. Mr. Speaker, the fact that so many people in the United States of America are hungry is a national disgrace. We should be outraged. There should be outrage in this chamber. There should be a sense of urgency that we need to solve this problem. Yet what we see is indifference and in some cases outright hostility toward those Americans who happen to be poor. The House of Representatives recently passed a farm bill that cut the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is designed to make sure people have enough to eat, but they've cut that program by $40 billion. In the Senate version, they cut it by about $4.5 billion. There's now a conference committee going on, and press reports say that maybe they'll decide on an $8 billion cut. $8 billion. What does that mean? That means that 850,000 families in this country will be impacted in a negative way by that cut, 1.7 million people. And for those people who would be impacted by that $8 billion cut, it is about a $90 cut per month in the benefit they get, $90. Now, you add this on top of a cut that happened on November 1st of this year. Every single person on the SNAP program received a cut. That cut that happened on November 1st for an average family of three would be about a $30 cut. So you add the $30 plus the $90 that we're now talking about, that's a $120 cut per month for these families. That's a lot of money. Because the fact of the matter is, the SNAP benefit as it stands, is not overly generous. In fact, I would say it's too stingy. It doesn't provide enough for people to be able to afford food, never mind nutritious food. A lot of the people who show up at our food banks and our food pantries are on the SNAP program. But to cut people's benefits, an average family of three, by about $120 per month is outrageous. We don't have to worry about, no one in this chamber has to worry about whether or not they can afford to put food on the table for their families. You know, why aren't we more concerned with the fact that there are so many people in this country who are food insecure and who are outright hungry? We need to do something about this. Mr. Speaker, you know, I've heard my colleagues say, well, we're not really trying to cut people's benefits. All we're trying to do is we're trying to reform the program. We're trying to combat a culture of dependency. When you cut this program that provides food to poor people, what you do is you don't deal with the issue of a culture of dependency. What you do is you make their lives more miserable. The fact of the matter is the majority of people on SNAP are children, are senior citizens, and are disabled people. Of those who can work, a majority of them work. There are people who work full-time, and still are so poor they qualify for SNAP assistance. And the response of this Congress is going to be to make their lives more miserable? I'd ask my colleagues who support these cuts, is that what you came here for? To make the lives of the most vulnerable in this country more miserable? Is that what you are here for? Is that the purpose of your service in the United States Congress? I mean, give me a break. Give me a break. We need to solve these problems. And the fact of the matter is that increasing hunger in America, you know, costs us a great deal. Hungry kids don't learn in school. Senior citizens who can't afford their food and their medication and take their medication on an empty stomach end up in our emergency rooms. There's a cost to hunger. In fact, it is more expensive to tolerate the hunger in America than it is to solve the problem. We were elected to solve problems, to lift people up, not put people down. And I will just finally close, Mr. Speaker, by saying I would urge the White House to get more involved in this issue. Get involved in this fight. There are some things worth fighting for. Ending poverty, ending hunger in America is worth fighting for. Mr. Speaker, I urge all my colleagues to reject cuts in the SNAP program that will increase hunger in America. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, for 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, to kick off this year's annual Computer Science Education Week taking place from December 9th to December 15th, I had the pleasure of visiting with students at Capitol High School in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We took part in the Global Hour of Code campaign organized by Computing in the Core and Code.org that offers introductory coding activities and tutorials. I also engaged with students about the importance of computer science by hosting a panel of industry professionals to highlight how diverse and exciting a career in computer science can truly be. Conversations like these can be useful in helping young people navigate towards careers in computer science and STEM. In today's world, a degree in computer science translates to high-paying, in-demand jobs. At a time when people are struggling to find work in our recovering economy, the computer science industry is growing, and New Mexico is predicted to add 15,360 computing jobs by 2018. It has become increasingly essential for students to learn the language of code in the same way that they learn reading and writing and mathematics. If we are to remain economically competitive and have a highly skilled workforce, access to computer science curricula and coding instruction must be a priority. However, nationwide, only 1 in 10 schools offers computer science, and there is a great lack of diversity in those that do. Just 4% of students enrolled are female, and 3% are students of color. In New Mexico, only 57 students took the computer science AP exam in 2012. This is a result in part of the fact that New Mexico does not offer computer science teacher certifications for middle and high school teachers, and is one of the 36 states that does not count computer science courses toward high school graduation requirements for math and science. Computer science provides students with the 21st century skills necessary for innovation by teaching design, logical reasoning, and problem solving. Yet too few students have access to this rigorous coursework. That's why I co-sponsored H.R. 2536, the Computer Science Education Act, that will help ensure that more students have access to computer science education by making it a core academic subject and including computer science teachers in professional development. I urge my colleagues to join me in support of the Computer Science Education Week and Computer Science Education Act. It is critically important that every student have the opportunity to learn computer science at an early age. When we show them that they have the power to create the next great app, not just use it, I believe we will capture their hearts and minds and foster the next generation of innovators. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Enyart, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to honor the memory of one of my constituents, Mr. John Rednauer of DuQuoin, Illinois. John passed away on December 1st, and I had the privilege of attending his funeral service last week. All of us came to honor a man who did so much for Southern Illinois. John had many titles, and most of us knew him as the mayor of DuQuoin, a position he held for 24 years. He was a businessman, a banker, an iron worker. He served for many years on the Illinois State Police Merit Board. But none of those titles do the man justice. He was one of the most foremost civic leaders in Illinois, and he worked tirelessly to improve Southern Illinois and to create opportunity and jobs for its people. John was a self-made man who rose from humble beginnings, but never forgot where he came from. His passing is a loss to our region. Most of all, it is a loss for his family, and today I ask my colleagues to remember the Rednauer family, especially John's wife of 61 years, Wanda, who was his true partner. Southern Illinois is a better place because of John Rednauer, and today I'm proud to honor my friend's memory. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Kaptur, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 5 minutes and to include extraneous material in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the political turmoil in Ukraine demands the world's attention. It is now 5 p.m. in Kiev, where protesters in Independence Square are regrouping after a night of violent clashes with Ukrainian security forces. As of now, the security forces have begun to pull back from the crackdown, and despite intimidation and threats of violence, the opposition has retained control of Euromaidan, the name given to Independence Square, in a clear sign of solidarity with Europe. The United States has sided unequivocally with those Ukrainians who are demonstrating for an independent Ukraine, for their rights to free assembly and free speech under provisions of international law, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our Secretary of State has called upon the government of Ukraine to respect the rights of all people and expressed disgust of the United States with the use of force against peaceful protesters as unbefitting a democracy. As Secretary Kerry noted, the right to free assembly is a universal value, not just an American value. The House Ukrainian Caucus, which I co-chair with Mr. Levin and Mr. Gerlach, has expressed its support for the rights of the Ukrainian people to exercise their rights to political speech and free assembly. Yes, these are difficult yet hopeful times for Ukraine, which is trying to find its rightful place among the community of nations despite daunting domestic challenges. The country is gripped by uncertainty, which is exacerbating an already difficult economic situation. The current crisis was triggered by the decision of the current political leadership to pursue free trade with Ukraine's eastern neighbor, Russia, rather than neighbors to the west, the European Union. Regardless of the political discord in Ukraine, this Congress should urge all parties to settle their internal disagreements peacefully and without violence. Ukraine's soils historically have been showered with the precious blood of her countrymen and women at a higher rate than most human beings could even imagine. The brilliantly recounted Bloodlands, written by Yale scholar Dr. Timothy Snyder, tells their story. Yes, though Ukraine's very name means borderland, she too often has been a bloodland. May this not happen now. Ukraine must adapt to embrace a world in which her own independence from interference surpasses any other priority. She should be free to engage all directions, east, west, south, and north, without fear of retaliation. She is a bridge to all nations, and therein will lie her prosperity. As Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor to President Carter, writes in today's Financial Times, 2 decades of independence, of growing pride in rediscovering Ukrainian history, and of observing the country's western neighbors economically benefiting from the European connections is creating a new mindset. That mindset is not embracing anti-Russianism, but it is asserting Ukraine's own historic identity as culturally an authentic part of a larger Europe. Mr. Brzezinski believes the current political change in Ukraine is part of an historically significant yet inevitable political transformation. He believes Ukraine and Russia, too, will eventually orient to the West, and I have ultimate respect in his opinion and pray he is correct. Those of us who love Ukraine have longed for the day when it is no longer a prisoner of geography, hemmed in between Germany and Russia, but a free and willing member of the community of democratic nations. Perhaps one day Ukraine will break free of the shackles of domination of the past. Perhaps one day Ukraine's geographic location will be an asset, not a liability, a day when Ukraine looks both east and west, and in fact in all 4 directions. But as we can see from the images coming to us from Kiev, the road will not be smooth. We know the future lies with freedom and with democracy and with opportunity, not repression and isolation. But that is cold comfort in the streets of Ukraine today. The United States Congress must stand forthrightly with the liberty-loving people of Ukraine during this difficult hour. And the people of Ukraine and the people of the United States should be inspired by the words of Ukraine's most famous poet, Taras Shevchenko, who said, "Then in your own house you will see true justice, strength, and liberty. There is no other such Ukraine." Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
Gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today. Thanks, sir.
So the House finishing up morning hour this morning. Legislative work will get underway at noon Eastern. Members will debate 5 bills today, including one encouraging the Secretary of State to work on an international agreement dealing with international child custody disputes. Another taking the federal funds set aside for national political conventions and giving it to pediatric research. The House is awaiting action on several issues that need to be resolved before the end of the year, including the federal budget deal announced yesterday, also Medicare payments to doctors. Live coverage when the House returns here on C-SPAN.